When you think of Italian food, you think Rome, Florence, Naples. But here's the truth. 10 of the dishes you order at every Italian restaurant weren't invented in any of those cities. They all came from Milan, and most people have no idea. Welcome back to Dish Decoded, where we investigate the hidden truths behind your favorite foods. Today, we're exposing why Milan, the fashion capital, is actually the hidden culinary capital of Italy. Let's decode this. Let's start with the most obvious one, risotto alla Milanese. That creamy saffron yellow rice dish that's become synonymous with Italian comfort food? Pure Milan. But here's what they don't tell you. This dish was invented by accident in 1574. A young apprentice working on the stained glass windows of the Milan Cathedral was obsessed with saffron. He used it to make his glass colors more vibrant. His colleagues joked that he loved saffron so much, he'd probably put it in his food. So, at his master's wedding, as a prank, he actually did it. He added saffron to the wedding risotto. Everyone expected it to be a disaster. Instead, it was incredible. The saffron gave the rice this golden color and subtle, earthy flavor that no one had tasted before. The dish became an instant hit, and risotto alla Milanese was born, all because of a joke at a wedding in 1574. You know Wiener Schnitzel, right? That breaded fried veal cutlet from Austria? Well, plot twist. Milan invented it first. Cotoletta alla Milanese dates back to the 12th century, about 600 years before the Austrians claimed it. The earliest written record appears in 1134, describing a breaded veal chop served to the canons of Sant'Ambrogio Church. But here's where it gets political. When Austria occupied Milan in the 1800s, Austrian Field Marshal Radetzky ate cotoletta alla Milanese and loved it so much he sent the recipe back to Vienna. The Austrians adapted it, made it thinner, and called it Wiener Schnitzel. So technically, every time you eat schnitzel in Austria or Germany, you're eating a Milanese dish. Milan just doesn't get the credit. The real Milanese version is thicker, bone-in, and fried in clarified butter. It's crispier, juicier, and honestly, way better than the Austrian knockoff. This sweet bread dome that shows up every Christmas, invented in Milan in the 15th century, and the origin story is straight out of a romantic comedy. Legend says a nobleman named Ughetto degli Atellani fell in love with Adalgisa, the daughter of a poor baker. To help her father's struggling bakery, Ughetto disguised himself as a baker's apprentice and created a rich bread with butter, eggs, sugar, and candied fruit. He called it panettone, Tony's bread, after himself. The bread became so popular that it saved the bakery. Ughetto revealed his true identity, and he got to marry Adalgisa. That's the romantic version, the more likely story. Milanese bakers in the 1400s started making luxury breads for wealthy families during Christmas, and panettone evolved from there. Either way, Milan owns it. Not Turin, not Rome, Milan. And now it's a billion-dollar global industry. Ossobuco literally means bone with a hole, and it's one of Milan's most ingenious inventions. In the late 1800s, Milanese butchers had a problem. Veal shanks were considered a cheap, undesirable cut. They had a big bone in the middle, they were tough, and nobody wanted them. So Milanese cooks developed a technique. They braised the shanks slowly in white wine, broth, tomatoes, and vegetables until the meat became fall-off-the-bone tender. Then they topped it with gremolata, a mix of lemon zest, garlic, and parsley. But the real prize? The bone marrow inside. That's what ossobuco is all about. You scoop out the marrow with a tiny spoon, spread it on bread, and experience one of the richest, most decadent flavors in Italian cuisine. Milan turned a trash cut into a delicacy. That's the Milanese way. That bright red, bitter Italian aperitif you see in Negronis and spritzes? Invented in Milan in 1860 by Gaspare Campari. Gaspare was a bartender who became obsessed with creating the perfect bitter liqueur. He experimented with over 60 ingredients, herbs, fruits, spices, until he landed on the iconic formula. But here's the dark secret. For over 100 years, Campari got its signature red color from cochineal insects. Yeah, crushed bugs. In 2006, they finally switched to artificial coloring, but for a century, you were drinking insect juice. The exact recipe is still a closely guarded secret, known by only a handful of people. Even the Campari family doesn't know it anymore. It's locked in a vault, and it all started in Gaspar's tiny bar in Milan, where he'd serve it to locals as a digestif. Now it's sold in over 190 countries. Minestrone exists all over Italy, but the Milanese version is completely different, and arguably the best. Most minestrone is made with tomatoes and whatever vegetables are in season. Milanese minestrone? No tomatoes. Instead, it uses rice, not pasta, seasonal vegetables like zucchini and green beans, and is finished with a sofrito of pancetta and sage. It was invented as a peasant dish in the 1800s, designed to use up leftover vegetables and stale bread. Milanese families would make huge pots on Sunday and eat it throughout the week. The key is the slow cooking, at least 3 hours needed, which breaks down the vegetables into a thick, creamy consistency without using any cream. It's simple, humble, and completely Milanese. One of the world's most famous blue cheeses? Yep, Milan. Gorgonzola was invented in the town of Gorgonzola just outside Milan in the 11th century, but the original version was nothing like what we eat today. Back then it was called stracchino di Gorgonzola, a soft, mild cheese made from the milk of tired cows. Stracchino means tired in Italian. Cows would stop in Gorgonzola on their way down from the Alps, and their milk would be used immediately. The blue veins, a complete accident. Cheesemakers would layer warm evening milk with cold morning milk, creating temperature differences that allowed mold spores to grow. Instead of throwing it out, they tasted it and realized the mold made it taste incredible. For 900 years, Gorgonzola has been made the same way in the Milan region, and now it's protected by EU law. You can't call it Gorgonzola unless it's made in this specific area. The Negroni sbagliato means mistaken, was invented by accident at Bar Basso in Milan in the 1960s. Bartender Mirko Stocchetta was making a Negroni, gin, Campari, vermouth, but grabbed a bottle of Prosecco instead of gin. He served it anyway, and the customer loved it. The lighter, bubblier version became a hit. Instead of the heavy, boozy punch of a regular Negroni, the Sbagliato is refreshing and sessionable. This is cotoletta's bigger, flatter cousin, and it's just as Milanese. The elephant's ear version takes a veal cutlet and pounds it paper thin, then breads and fries it until it's the size of a dinner plate. It's crispy, light, and absolutely massive. This version became popular in Milan's working-class trattorias in the early 1900s. It was a way to stretch expensive veal further, pound it thin, bread it up, and make it look impressive. Now it's a staple at every traditional Milanese restaurant. Here's the big one. Milan didn't just invent drinks and dishes, they invented an entire food culture that's now global. The foundation was laid in 1786 when Turin invented vermouth, but Milan took it and made it their own. In 1860, Gaspare Campari opened his distillery in Milan. 7 years later, in 1867, he opened Caffè Camparino in the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II, right next to the Duomo. This is where Aperitivo culture was born. Milanese businessmen would stop after work for a bitter drink and small snacks, olives, nuts, breadsticks, to socialize before heading home for dinner. By the late 1800s, Milan had established itself as the Aperitivo capital. Bars started offering more elaborate appetizers, crostini, boiled eggs, canapes, cold cuts. It wasn't about filling up, it was about extending the conversation, slowing down, enjoying the moment. The culture evolved through the 20th century. In 1967, Bar Basso solidified Milan's cocktail culture with bartender Mirko Stocchetto, creating the Negroni Spagliato and other iconic drinks. Then in 1996, everything changed. A venue called Royalto opened with massive illuminated chandeliers and themed food stations. Pizza, pasta, sushi, salads. They kept the happy hour formula but turned it into an elaborate buffet. The competition exploded. Bars weren't competing on who had the best bartender anymore, but who had the most loaded buffet. This is where Aperitivo was born, a combination of aperitivo and cena, dinner. You pay for one drink and get access to a full meal. Today, aperitivo culture has spread to every major city in the world. What Americans call happy hour is just Milan's aperitivo tradition exported globally. But it started right here, in the bars around the Duomo with Campari and vermouth, creating a ritual that brought people together. So there you have it, 10 iconic Italian foods that all trace back to Milan. From risotto to panettone to the entire aperitivo tradition, Milan has shaped how the world eats Italian food. If you learned something new, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into food history. And drop a comment, what food origin story should I investigate next? Until next time, stay curious.